Bienvenidos a esta nueva edición de Cambio de Grado. Esta vez estamos con una invitada desde otro país. Vamos a estar hablando con Kraft de NASA, porque NASA está teniendo una nueva misión que va a llevar al ser humano no solo a la Luna, sino que a Marte. Esta es una nueva misión que no se daba desde 1972, desde las misiones Apolo, así que tenemos mucho que conversar. Te damos la bienvenida, Rachel. How are you? How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you as well. Thank you so much for your time, for being here with us. So what I wanted to start with is asking a little bit about why we're going to the moon now. Because it's been over 50 years now.
It has indeed. So I would say a few things. One, since the Apollo program, we've been exploring space in other ways. We built the International Space Station about 200 or 250 miles up in space. That taught us a lot about how to live in space for long periods of time. We flew the space shuttle to do that. We've been exploring space through scientific activities like our rovers on Mars and our planetary probes. And now what we're doing is we're going back to the moon, this time to really build a long-term presence there and do so in order to build the skills and the technology we need to go to Mars. And that's all under this program that we call Artemis.
So when we talk about long-term, are we thinking about building a base that allows humans to live on the moon? Can you explain a little bit more about how Artemis would work?
So in Apollo, we had a handful of missions where we sent 2 astronauts each time to the surface, and they were on the surface of the moon for a period of days. This time under Artemis, really the intent is to have infrastructure on the moon, to have rovers there, to have facilities that we can reuse. So for instance, in addition to a rover, maybe we have other things on the surface where crews can visit and potentially explore different areas of the surface of the moon. And this time we're going to be going to the South Pole region where we know that there's evidence of water ice. And so in addition to that, we are establishing something like a lunar space station in orbit around the moon that we call Gateway. And really we can use that to aggregate supplies so that we can go down to the surface for longer stays, maybe 30 days at a time, maybe longer. That way we are reusing some of our infrastructure so we don't need to take everything with us and bring it back every time we go.
So what you mentioned in that regard is very interesting because we're talking about landing on a surface that we haven't ever landed before, correct?
Well, we have landed on the surface of the moon through Apollo.
But not this side, the South Pole.
The South Pole, right. The South Pole has unique challenges. It's very dark. It can be very cold. Communications relay from that area of the moon can also be a challenge. And then we know we have a lot of the same challenges that we had during Apollo. It's very difficult to go to the moon. You have things like dust, lunar dust, that can be very challenging if it gets into a lunar spacesuit. And the whole endeavor comes with inherent risk. So while there are definitely some challenges that remain the same because of the nature of going to the moon, there are many new challenges associated with both doing this in a different way than we did in Apollo and going to the area of the moon that we intend to go to.
Perfect, I understand. And so we intend to be there for longer periods of time. How are we selecting the crew that is going on these missions?
We have an absolutely amazing group of astronauts at NASA. We also have international partner astronauts that we work with to integrate into our training. We have a crew for the Artemis 2 mission that is slated to take place in the fall of next year. And that is a group of 4 American astronauts and 1 Canadian. And you will see, if you take a look at their biographies, they bring a wealth of knowledge about living in space and for long periods of time, working well as a team. They bring tremendous technical expertise. We also have a couple pilots on that flight. So the selection on which specific astronauts get assigned to a particular mission, that decision is made by the chief of the astronaut office, and they always take a look at the skill mix, the teamwork dynamic, to make sure that the crew, the astronauts that were going to fly on a particular mission, and this will be the case for Artemis 3 and any future Artemis mission, really has the right mix of skills to be able to accomplish what we ask them to go do.
We've seen that on these new missions, there's going to be a lot of new technology being tested, right? Like new spacesuits, new rovers. So how do you train here on Earth to do something like that on the moon after?
Well, training is really important. We train for all kinds of scenarios. In addition to training our crews, we train our teams on the ground, our flight controllers that help accomplish the mission after launch, our launch teams who are in charge of fueling up the rocket, getting us ready to go, and then launching once it's safe to do so. So training is really key. Our crews train in lots of different ways. They might go through timelines for a launch day. For instance, they had a test, the Artemis 2 astronauts had a test several months ago where they went through the day of launch procedures. They got in their spacesuits in the same facility where they'll do it on launch day. They rode out to the launch pad in the vehicles that will take them there. They took the elevators up the mobile launch tower, and their spacecraft wasn't there to get into because we haven't yet assembled the rocket for their mission, but they made it all the way to that, what we call a white room, which is their last kind of steps on Earth before they get into this spacecraft. In addition, they're in the simulator that we have at Johnson Space Center in Houston, testing how do we fly this vehicle in a normal scenario? What if something goes wrong? What are we responsible for doing? And then they're testing in all kinds of other ways. Currently, the crew is in Iceland, where they were doing some geology training that will help them not only learn to look for the kinds of features that they will see when they're flying around the far side of the moon and taking photographs, but they're kind of like pathfinders for our future astronaut crews, trying to help our teams of engineers and scientists refine timelines and procedures that astronauts on the surface of the moon will use in the future to pick up interesting rocks, take samples, and learn more about the surface of the moon.
And in that regard, so what are our expectations? Like, what do we think that we can find, that we can establish? I saw some sort of moon mining site. So what can we extract? Can we use some of that on Earth, or is that going to be used to escalate further onto Mars?
So we hope to learn exactly about that. We know that the moon is rich with resources, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, things needed to make water, and other things that we call volatiles or resources at the moon. And so we can take a look at what those are. Maybe we want to use them in the future both to sustain our activities on the moon, or maybe there's an opportunity to take advantage of those resources, use them, make them into something new. For instance, hydrogen and oxygen, we use those as propellant for some of our rockets. Perhaps there's a way to use those to help us as we go to Mars or to another destination.
And talking about Mars, what is the expectation now that we have recent findings that talk about liquid water on Mars? Because, as you said, it's very important in regard to fuel. So what can we expect from that? What can we dream about Mars?
So findings like this from our rover on Mars make the prospect of sending humans to Mars even more exciting from my perspective. We know that Mars shows signs that there could have once been life there. We have rovers there, and it's been human nature since the beginning of time to explore. We've seen much exploration on Earth. We've seen much exploration in space, and it's been our horizon goal to send humans to Mars. And I think the robots that we have on Mars are really our pathfinders to help us investigate what life may have been here in the past? Are there signs that there could have been any signs of organic matter here? And it remains our long-term goal to go there. And part of the reason we're doing our Artemis missions is, again, to help us learn how to operate farther from home than we've ever done before, to have reliable systems. And if you think about the moon, it's about 250,000 miles from home. While that is quite far, it is a handful of days away from Earth. So in an emergency, say on the lunar surface, teams could come home within a matter of days. When you go to Mars, it's a minimum of 9 months one way. And of course, once you get there, you want to stay for a little bit, explore before you come home. So there's no way to turn around on the way to Mars. We know we need very reliable systems, and it takes a lot of planning to get there, to send humans there, sustain life there, and then to bring them home. So there's much we have to learn at the moon in order to one day go to Mars.
Is there a time frame where we're expecting this? Because we're trying to get to the moon next year. But what about Mars? Is it 5 years from now? Is it 10 years from now?
Our goal is to be there in the 2040s.
Perfect. And the Artemis missions are special and different as well, because this will be the first time that a woman will be on the moon. So that's very exciting. What can we expect from that?
Well, I think during the Apollo era, you saw, mostly only white men land on the surface of the moon. We know that when you talk about the population of the world and the United States, that is not representative of the population. So under Artemis, we plan to send the first woman, the first person of color, and the first international partner astronaut to the surface of the moon. And part of what NASA does is we inspire. So in addition to exploring and finding what's happening in the universe for the benefit of humanity, we also seek to inspire people around the world. And one way to inspire people is to show them that people like them can explore space. And we have many different kinds of people who work for NASA who are capable of becoming astronauts. And so, when we send the first woman to the moon, it will be very exciting for me personally, and I think many, many millions of people, hopefully billions of people around the world, to see that, hey, they can do amazing things and accomplish great feats as well.
Yes, as a matter of fact, there's an engineering student right now. I think she's about 20 years old, and I saw that she's looking to train to become an astronaut. She's from Chile, so we're also very excited about that possibility about her maybe someday going to the moon, maybe to Mars. Like, the sky's the limit, right?
That's exactly right. If you, I think a lot of our astronauts tell students every day when they speak to them, it's really about finding what's passionate, where your passion is, and pursuing that relentlessly.
And talking about the whole system that is being set up to this mission, it's one of the biggest systems that we have seen. The spaceship is huge. It's being made in collaboration with private enterprises as well, such as SpaceX. We have the Orion spaceship. We have the Gateway. How will this whole work? How do you assemble such a big infrastructure and lift it and take it to space? Can we understand?
Huge. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a huge undertaking, and there are a lot of different pieces of the overall infrastructure. I think under Artemis, one of the things that's different about Apollo is NASA doesn't own every single element under Artemis, as NASA did during Apollo. And while the United States is leading, we are bringing other countries and our industry partners along with us. So we've got 3 fundamental elements that help get our astronauts up to space: our Space Launch System rocket, the Orion spacecraft, and then our substantial ground infrastructure at Kennedy Space Center that helps launch them. And then we've got, for Artemis 3, we've got SpaceX supplying Starship. that will rendezvous with Orion in space and then take our crews to the surface of the moon. On future missions, we'll have Gateway as an area where crew can arrive. It's a staging ground where then Starship or other lunar lander provider Blue Origin can come pick up the crew and take them to the surface. And then we have our spacesuits. We're bringing other partners in to supply things in the future, something like a lunar rover or other habitable systems that we may add on in the future. So it's really not only a NASA effort, it's a global endeavor. And we are bringing the know-how of the industry community along with us too.
That's where you get the saying, right? Like for all humanity, like it's for everybody.
That's right, and it's a reality. I mean, NASA does not have the budget to do all of this alone. There's expertise well beyond our organization, and we want to bring all that with us. It is a humanity effort, effort requiring all of humanity to do something like this.
And talking about the launches themselves, how do you know when you can launch? For example, in Chile, astronomy is huge in the sense that we have some of the clearest skies in the world, so it's very good for observation. How do you decide, and where will you be launching from?
We intend to launch our astronauts from Kennedy Space Center, which is NASA's facility in Florida. And there are many, many criteria that have to be just right in order to launch. As you can probably guess with rockets, you can't really afford to have something not go right. Everything has to be working as desired, as planned. So we have weather criteria, which can be tricky in Florida. But we have very skilled meteorologists that can help us find the right criteria. And then we have to have our rocket fully loaded. We have to have our crews loaded. There's so many different elements, from making sure that every technical issue is ready to go on our rocket and our spacecraft, to the weather, and then to a lot of our communications channels to make sure that once the crews launch and get to space, we can communicate with them. We have the data flowing from our spacecraft and rocket, and all that has to come together in order for us to be ready to go.
Thank you. And about communications as well, how do you communicate with somebody that is supposed to be so many kilometers, as we say, away?
Well, we have amazing technology. So one of the things we use is we have a series of data tracking satellites and relay systems in space. They help us relay the communications from an astronaut crew to the ground. Well, we know that when we go to Mars, there will be a very lengthy delay between communications from the crew to back to Earth, depending on where they are in space or if they're on the surface of Mars. Going to the moon, it shouldn't be too much of a delay. So that should allow for real-time communications. I will note, though, on Artemis 2, our first crewed flight under Artemis, the crew will fly behind the far side of the moon, and they will experience about 45 minutes of communications blackout, where we can't communicate that with them because the moon blocks the path between the spacecraft and Earth. So we won't be getting data from the spacecraft. We won't be hearing from the crew. We will know what path they're on because we had data coming in at that point on for what the trajectory has them on. But we will be out of communications with them for a period of time, and I think it'll be exciting once we get to hear from them after their journey beyond the far side of the moon.
For sure. And talking about all the way back, right? So I've seen them land on the ocean. They're supposed to be landing on the Pacific Ocean somewhere. I don't know exactly where, but can you explain a little bit how they will be pulled back towards the Earth?
Sure. So for Artemis 2, it's a unique trajectory in that because of the way the Earth and Moon align and because how we're able to essentially program the spacecraft, we will set their trajectory for going around the moon and returning when we do a big engine burn several days after we launch to even go. So we will set them on course basically on the second or third day of flight to fly around the moon and use the moon's gravity to slingshot us back to Earth. And at that point, there actually will be very little propellant that we need to come back to Earth because of the trajectory that we got set on by the spacecraft when we did our big engine firing to go to the moon. And so they will come back. We have some abilities to make some slight corrections to exactly where they land. Let's say there's bad weather at their specific landing site in the Pacific Ocean. We have some ability to modify that within, several hundred miles to maybe divert for weather. But then they'll come back in the Pacific Ocean, they'll land, we'll have a recovery ship waiting for them and highly trained teams ready to go assist them out of their spacecraft and bring them back to the ship waiting for them and then back to land.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that explanation. I think people will definitely understand now the system of how we are bringing people home.
I lost the audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So what I found very interesting as well is that Artemis is actually the twin sister of Apollo. So I find that figure to be poetic even, right? And so one is the moon, the other one is the sun. Now we're talking about an Artemis generation. So this is just the first step on a long history of deep space travel even. So what are your expectations regarding this new Artemis generation?
Well, if you come to NASA, you see there are a lot of people who remember Apollo, remember landing on the moon, but there are a lot of people who don't. And I myself, I'm one of those folks that I wasn't alive during the Apollo era. So there are many people who were inspired to go into a STEM field, into science, engineering, math, because of what they saw happen on the moon under Apollo. We need that for the people on Earth now who weren't born during the Apollo era. And we saw back in the 1960s and 1970s, it is a huge opportunity to inspire people to follow their dreams, to pursue science and engineering and technological fields that will advance humanity's ability to thrive.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time and for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that we can remain in touch so we can be there with you on the way to the first launch.
Absolutely.
You're eagerly waiting for that to happen.
Yes, can't wait.
Thank you so much. I hope that you have a great day.
You. You too, take care.
Thank you. Estuvimos entonces con Rachel Kraft de la NASA, quien nos estuvo explicando sobre esta nueva misión que va a llevar a la humanidad no solo de vuelta a la Luna, sino que además a Marte. Todos los detalles se los vamos a seguir contando. Esto es una misión que está en permanente actualización, así que no se olviden de seguir revisando Megatiempo en sus plataformas digitales también, megatiempo.cl. Que tengan un excelente día.